everyone. I'm Reverend Jim. This is the Whole Bible, the show where we look at the whole Bible, chapter by chapter, story by story. We are in Genesis chapters 31 through 36 right now. We are coming close-ish to the end of Genesis, which is kind of a big deal. But this is part 2 of Jacob's story. We started him last week, the whole drama and all the tricks and him running away from home and getting tricked by Uncle Laban. And now we're going to see the return trip back. So just to catch you up, we've had Abraham, we've had Isaac, we've had Jacob. We're about to have Joseph. And this part, Genesis 31 through 36, follows Jacob as he leaves Laban, journeys back toward his homeland, confronts his past with Esau, and establishes a new stage of his family's life. Got a lot going on. Now, a big part of this story is going to be when his name changes. So instead of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and about to be Joseph, we could say this is Abraham, Isaac, Israel, and Joseph. This story is how we get the name Israel. Now, is all of this one big story? These multiple generations, one to the other, to the other, to the other, father and a son and a son and a son? Or could it be that these are 3 stories that were later combined into one narrative? We have Abraham's story, we have Jacob's story, we have Joseph's story. Isaac kind of gets tucked in there under the Abraham side. You can see the 3 independent stories that could have been brought together under a single narrative arc. There's a story of a person who left their land and was called by God, Abraham. There was the patriarch who bore the name Israel. That's where we are right now, getting the name Israel in this video. And then there was Joseph, who we'll get to in the next 2 videos, who's the reason they ended up as slaves in Egypt as the story goes. Although when we get to Exodus, we'll have similar questions about the historicity of Exodus. Some scholars will say that these are independent cycles that were stitched together into a single narrative. Similar to modern day nativity stories. This is maybe my favorite analogy for this. Trust me, we're going to get to Jacob's story in a second, but stick with me. Think about how the Christmas story is depicted in our world today. You got shepherds and magi often pushed into the same scene. Now, if you actually read the Bible, you'll see that they are 2 separate accounts. The magi, or wise men, they're in Matthew, and the shepherds are in Luke, but we often combine them into one single story. So imagine a world where we no longer have Matthew and Luke. We don't have those original sources, those original stories, but we keep nativity scenes. We still have these every December setups that go in front of houses and churches and wherever you might find them. We might end up with a new version of the story that combines these 2 characters into the single story rather than keeping them into 2 separate accounts. Are you following? That's some of the thought as to what could be happening here. These could have been separate accounts, and over time we lost the separate individual original accounts, and all we have are the amalgamation of the stories that emerged throughout the culture and group that became Israel. Okay, if you're still with me, thanks. We're talking about Jacob, Israel. Genesis 31 through 36 affirms that blessing emerges in the midst of conflict, that God remains present in human pain and complexity, and that identity, both individual and communal, is forged through courageous encounters with the past and hopeful steps into the future. So here we go, 6 chapters. We got a bit to cover here. In Genesis 31, this is escape and liberation. This is where Jacob flees Laban's exploitative control. Remember all that from last week with the whole goat, sheep tricks. This is supported by his wives, plural, Rachel and Leah, who voiced their own grievances about being treated as property. That's a pretty good comment both for how women are treated in the Bible and still in our world today. Now, God protects Jacob in the confrontation that follows, highlighting divine solidarity with people resisting unjust labor systems. Whew! Did you catch that? God protects Jacob in the confrontation, divine solidarity with people resisting unjust labor systems. Can you think of any unjust labor systems in our world today? Yeah. Genesis 32, this is fear and wrestling. We're preparing to meet Esau, and Jacob has this moment where he wrestles with a mysterious divine figure. You probably heard this story before. Jacob wrestles with God. We call it God, but if you look at the actual text, we don't really know who this divine figure is. And this is the moment when Jacob is renamed Israel, struggles with God. That's what Israel means. And this symbolizes a people who struggle towards blessing. This encounter transforms Jacob's identity and reframes his fear through vulnerability, courage, and divine presence. This chapter, this particular moment is so foundational to so much that will follow a people who struggle with God. And I think it says something about what sort of relationship we are to have with the divine. Could we still have that sort of struggle, that sort of back and forth, that sort of we get to apply pressure and feel some pressure applied back sort of relationship. All right, chapter 33, reconciliation and repair. This is where Jacob and Esau reunite, not in violence like Jacob might have anticipated, because remember, he did kind of trick and betray his brother. But what was just a few pages for us was many, 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 many years for these brothers. And in this surprising act of grace, they embrace as brothers after these years of estrangement. And their reconciliation models the possibility of healing even within deeply fractured relationships. Esau didn't have to be like, welcome home, brother. He's been the one there in the land, in the space. I wonder if he thought his brother had died. Isn't that interesting? And this is going to be a story we see mirrored in the next one with Joseph, where there's this sense of the brother being gone and then a reunion and a return. Exile and return is kind of an ongoing theme in all of the Bible and life, death, resurrection, right? Isn't that how it goes? All right, chapter 34, violation and violence. We take kind of an aside here. This kind of brings us out of the Jacob narrative we've been in with this whole reconciliation with Esau. And this one is not an easy chapter. Dinah, one of Jacob's daughters, because he has a bunch of sons and one daughter, she is assaulted, and her brothers enact revenge, escalating the tragedy and exposing the destructive cycle of honor-based violence. You hurt my family, I'm going to decimate yours. Do we ever do that today? This chapter confronts readers with the realities of sexual violence, patriarchal control, and the misuse of family honor. You definitely read the whole story, read the whole Bible, but read this chapter for sure. There's just always the moments when the story seems to give us an aside, this is also happening kind of view that we should pay attention to, because that could have easily been omitted or edited out of the story to keep it, on track. But we have these moments to realize the breadth of what's happening alongside the main story we might see happening at play. Next chapter, Genesis 35, renewal and loss. This we see a renewal of the covenant, this time with Jacob at Bethel, reaffirming the promise and God's new identity as Israel. You got some losses here too. Rachel's death, that's the favorite wife. Isaac's death, the dad. Remember we thought he was so close to dying chapters ago, ages ago? This is where it actually happens. All those years where Jacob's been off tricking and being tricked, his dad was still alive. And really this reminds us that blessing and grief can coexist, and they often do. We find them both typically simultaneous, side by side. All right, one more with Jacob, Genesis 36, lineage and legacy. This presents the genealogy of Esau, not Jacob. This kind of gives us another don't forget about this guy. This emphasizes that he too becomes a great nation with a rich and complex lineage. We'll get more on Esau's descendants in Exodus, the Edomites. That's a whole other thing that comes up. But this chapter affirms the dignity and significance of non-Israelite people within a biblical story that typically centers and privileges the Israelites as the ever-present and eternal heroes. So a lot going on here. This is Jacob Part 2. Let's now hear 6 chapters in 6 minutes. You're going to hear Reverend Amanda Meisenheimer, Joseph Yu, Adrian Thorne, Jonathan Favors Grimes, me, and Jerlyn Henry. This is going to be another fantastic lineup. So 6 minutes. I'll see you then.
Bible in a minute. Genesis chapter 31, in-law drama. Jacob and Laban are not getting along, and that is because Laban keeps trying to cheat Jacob by saying, in the spring, you can have all of the lambs that are born that are speckled. But God is on Jacob's side, and coincidentally, all the lambs that are born are speckled. And Jacob gets a disproportionate amount of wealth from this over and over, and Laban is annoyed. So his favor turns against Jacob. And Jacob realizes this, and under the cover of night, escapes with all of his livestock, family, everything. Laban is angry about this and chases him down. They have a settlement agreement in front of a pile of rocks. And then Laban says to him after they've had dinner, "The Lord watch between us as we depart from each other." Now, people say this as a blessing to one another all the time these days, but what Laban really meant is God is watching you.
Bible in a minute, Genesis chapter 32. In this chapter, Jacob is fixing to go home for the first time to meet his brother after running away, after stealing his brother's inheritance. And he is scared because he thinks that Esau is still angry at him and wants to kill him. And he can't sleep. And while he's up all night, he sees an angel of the Lord and they start wrestling naturally. And at the end of this wrestling match, God gives Jacob a new name, saying that you're no longer Jacob, but you're Israel, because you have struggled against humans and God and have won. And the thing about struggle is that struggle is a function of life, because if you're not struggling, you're not living, you're not alive. So it's okay to struggle. To struggle means that you are alive. And in our struggles, we are never alone, because first, God has given us the gift of community, and secondly, God is always with us, even in our struggles.
Bible in a Minute, Genesis chapter 33. Jacob is heading home, and big brother Esau is coming to meet little brother Jacob, who tricked him and robbed him. Esau's coming with 400 men. When I told my kid Esau was coming with 400 men and asked, what do you think that means? They said, Jacob's going to get his behind kicked. That's what you'd think, right? Except it never happens. Esau comes running to meet little brother Jacob. He embraces him and covers his face in kisses. Wow, what a welcome. The brothers weep, and Esau says, introduce me to your family, little bro. Then Esau asks, why all the gifts? To which Jacob replies, I was trying to find favor in your eyes. In other words, hoping you wouldn't beat me up. And Esau says, keep your wealth, brother. I've got plenty. But Jacob insists because he's just so grateful to see his big brother again. Seeing your face, he says to Esau, is like seeing the face of God. What a love. And what an example for us to follow.
Bible in a Minute, Genesis 34. So Leah and Jacob have a daughter named Dinah, who went to visit the women of the land near the pagan city of Shechem. While there, Hamar's son Shechem saw Dinah and he raped her. When the news about Dinah came to Jacob's sons, Dinah's brother, they were filled with anger. Hamar's son Shechem was deeply in love with Dinah, and he wanted to make Dinah his wife. A proposal was made by Jacob's sons in regard to circumcision. The agreement was for every male to be circumcised in order to marry Dinah. But upon their agreement, Simeon and Levi, Jacob's sons, Dinah's brother, went throughout the land, the city, killing every male, including Hamar and Shechem.
Bible in a Minute, Genesis chapter 35. Jacob's journey home continues, and his newly changed name from Jacob to Israel, from trickster to struggles with God, is reinforced. And it's in these final stages of their journey that his favorite wife dies during the birth of his 12th son. Rachel, in her final breath, names this son Ben-Oni, which means son of my sorrow. But Jacob, high off his newly changed name, decides to change the name of what will become his favorite son from Ben-Oni to Benjamin, from son of my sorrow to son of the right hand. Now, this is interesting for a lot of reasons. Typically, the firstborn son would be the favorite and the one to sit at this prestigious right hand, but here we see it's the younger son. A reminder that Jacob himself was the youngest who tricked his way into the family blessing. And second, it's interesting the way these stories so casually drown out the voices of women. Sorry, Rachel, even though it was your literal dying wish, we're going to change his name. What would it look like for us to intentionally hear and honor the voices of women, both in the Bible and in our world today?
Bible in a Minute, Genesis chapter 36. This whole chapter is dedicated to the genealogy of Esau, who is commonly remembered as the one who exchanged his birthrights for a bowl of soup. He is one of Scripture's earliest examples of somebody who is not chosen. We as Christians, especially Christians of the West, we see ourselves as chosen people, right? We think that we are the ones for whom God rushes in, destroys our enemies just to protect. But the Old Testament, dedicating a whole chapter to the genealogy, the history of somebody who doesn't take that particular path, tells us two things. One, God cares for and values all people. And two, if God cares and values the dignity of all people, then we are to live into the baptismal vows that we make when we say that I will honor and uphold the dignity of every human being. Because God cares, we are to care.
All right, welcome back. Here we are, 6 videos done. Couple questions. First, what stands out to you? What do you notice? Notice what you notice. That's generally a good starting point whenever you're doing a slower, closer read of anything, especially an ancient text like the Bible. And then here are 3 specific questions that might be interesting. What does Jacob's wrestling match teach us about transformation through struggle or vulnerability? How can we read Dinah's story without erasing her or justifying the men's actions? Why might Scripture include such detailed genealogies for non-Israelite people? Leave a comment with your thoughts on any and all of that below. And next week, we are turning to the final main character of this Genesis book, Joseph. I'll see you then.